Hey everyone, it's Laura from the NSU and I'm joined by Brent today to talk about complaints, which is in the operations section of the National Safeguarding Guidance. So Brent's kindly here to talk to us about complaints in the Y and what that means. So Brent, can you start by just telling us broadly what does complaints mean at the Y?
Awesome, thank you. So you'll know if you've seen our empowerment section for this video series, that we want to hear the voice of children and young people. And one of the easiest way to do that is obviously to hear their complaints and their feedback. So whilst we call this section of the framework complaints, we're actually talking about a lot of stuff. We're talking about positive comments as well, just to make sure that they're actually getting that information to us. And as we'll say a little bit later, we can continuously improve. So it's essentially just getting that feedback, that voice from children and young people, as well as their parents and any members of the community, just in case we've got any areas of vulnerability that we haven't identified yet.
And we do have the Stay Safe Tell Someone program, which is all around empowerment and hearing the voice of children and young people as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that as well?
Sure thing. It's quite simple, luckily. If a child or a young person or even a staff member or volunteer sees something, feels something, or hears something, I got the order wrong on that one though, I'll tell you that. It's just important to actually read. It's actually important to reach out, so tell somebody. So nobody has to go through this kind of thing, whether it's a procedure for our staff or our volunteers, or the actual experience, unfortunately, for children and young people. They don't have to go through it alone. It's out reaching out and actually taking a collective approach to try and make the situation better.
Right. And who can they tell? What would be the, process, or how can people raise these concerns or complaints?
Yeah, sure. So the majority of concerns that we see as the National Safeguarding Unit have actually been passed on by frontline staff. So a young person or a child might actually feel more comfortable, and this is a matter of pride for their YMCA, is that they feel so comfortable with their frontline staff, so their OSHA coordinators or their gym coordinators and the people who run the classes and that kind of thing, that they're actually making these disclosures to them. Okay, which equally is a good thing, so that we can hear the children and young people, but obviously there's a bit of a burden on our staff as well, so we can talk about that as well.
Yeah. And if a staff member then, is to receive a concern or a complaint from a child or young person, how should they respond to that disclosure? Any kind of tips or top tips that you can give us on that?
The first thing that I'll say is that it will almost always knock you for six. All right. As human beings, and incidentally, the more you care about a child or a young person, the less equipped you're going to feel in these conversations, because they never come at the right time, obviously. But it's about making sure that you're actually letting the child or the young person control the conversation. Often as adults, we might want to sort of interject, and if we've got a bias, which we all have as well, is that we're actually going to end up controlling the conversation, and the report about the safeguarding concern will then unfortunately just be our assessment of the concern rather than what the child or the young person is trying to tell us. So it's important to listen, not to interject, to ask open questions. So don't ask something like, do you mean this when you say this? It's actually about asking, what do you mean when you say this? And then you're actually getting the information straight from the child. But I will say, all of us are going to have biases. It's something that we can't avoid. It's essentially, it's how we continue to survive. So how I will take tomorrow, for example, is based on over, sadly, 30 years of personal experiences that I've had in the past. And obviously that's pretty much how I will continue to move on to the next day. So it's about acknowledging that we all have biases, but we just sort of have to put them to the side, let the child tell us or the young person tell us what they'd like to tell us, and not speaking for them.
Yeah, sure. And staying calm, which is hard, absolutely.
100%.
Yeah. And I guess if we want to talk then about the next steps from that as well, what would a Y person do once they've received that disclosure or they've noticed a concern or complaint? What are the next steps that they need to do?
Tell someone. So hashtag stay safe.
Yeah.
It's important to reach out. If you feel like you're not comfortable, or you're not equipped, or you don't feel like your training has backed you up, let us know, because we can improve it. But it's just about reaching out to your managers or to the safeguarding unit, so our team, or to your safeguarding lead within your association. You don't have to manage these things alone. So you will have to have the conversation itself by yourself, but as soon as the conversation sort of ends, get on the phone with us, get on the phone to your employee assistance program, and actually look after yourself as well. Because obviously if you get that burnout, unfortunately we might miss things when we need to report things to child protection agencies, or even to the police if it hits that threshold.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So what, do each association have their own safeguarding procedure, or what's, the localised procedure that they would need to follow?
Yeah, so unfortunately with the Y, sometimes we like to call things different things, but for the most part, every association association will have either a safeguarding procedure, a safeguarding manual, or a responding to safeguarding concerns procedure. Now, if you're unsure of what yours is called, make sure you reach out to your safeguarding lead or your manager.
Okay. And within those procedures, there might be some different legislation requirements or reporting requirements as well.
Yep,
Can you
sure.
tell us about those?
Yep. Well, I'm happy to tell you more outside of this video, of course, but a very brief summary is there's two main pieces of legislation when you talk about safeguarding, in addition, obviously, to the CEQA complaints management process requirements when you're in the OSH and the ELC sort of space. But the two that the National Safeguarding Unit sort of, I guess, supports our staff with more comfortably is reportable conduct, which is only relevant to currently relevant to ACT, New South Wales and Victoria, where your CEO actually takes responsibility if our staff actually offends against a child or a young person and that has not been appropriately managed. So if we fail to report it to a child protection agency, the CEO takes ultimate responsibility, okay? And the second one is mandatory reporting. Now that's in all states and territories, but the requirements for that legislation are vastly different. Because what it is essentially saying, depending on the career that you have and the type of your role, so whether you're a teacher, for example, an out of school hours care coordinator or an early learning centre coordinator or a long day care centre for our friends in Queensland, depending on the nature of your role, you actually may have a legislative requirement to report something if you feel that a child is unsafe in the home environment or within the community. Now, what's really important about that one is that's not CEO, that's an individually applied piece of legislation. So if I, for example, were to fail to report it to, say, for example, in Victoria, we have the Commission for Children and Young People. If I fail to report something to them, I'm individually liable.
Right.
So it's really important that all of our staff and volunteers look into this legislation and understand their responsibilities outside of obviously the policy responsibilities as well.
Okay. Wonderful. Is there anything else, I guess, as far as complaints that would be beneficial for our frontline staff or our member wise to know? Anything else?
I'm sort of just going to reiterate some key points there is reach out. If you see something, you hear something, or you feel something, tell someone. Make sure you're telling the appropriate staff though, so it can't be sort of, you can't necessarily mention it in a team meeting because we've got to consider privacy implications as well. But make sure you're reaching out to your safeguarding lead, our unit, or your manager. And the second thing is you don't have to do it alone. Okay, so make sure that you're looking after yourself because these things, especially mandatory reporting, when it comes to potentially incidents at the family home that you might have seen a bruise or you might suspect some abuse at home, unfortunately that is probably one of the best and worst examples of how our ability to influence and protect that child is actually very limited because if a parent or a caregiver doesn't want our help, unfortunately we have to actually refer to the third parties and sort of let them do their job. So police and child protection. So you really need to reach out. You're not weak if you can't handle something like that. I mean, all of us have had those days. It's just about making sure that you're not doing it alone.
Great. Thank you.